It is impossible to make a full report of the happenings, but what I saw was bad enough, and yet I cannot tell all that I saw. When I fully realized what was happening, I saw men and women fleeing for their lives, while white men by the hundreds pursued them, firing in all directions. As one woman was running from her home, she suddenly fell with a bullet wound. Then I saw airplanes. They flew very low. To my surprise, as they passed over the business district, they left the entire block a mass of flame. I saw men, women, and children driven like cattle, huddled like horses, and treated like beasts. Thus, I fully realized the attitude of the Southern white man when he is, you best it. I saw hundreds of men marched through the main business section of Whitetown with their hats off and their hands up, with dozens of guards marching them with guns, cursing them for everything mentionable. I saw large trucks following up the invaders as they ran the colored people from their homes and places of business. Everything of value was loaded on these trucks, and everything left was burnt to ashes. I saw machine guns turned on the colored men to oust them from their stronghold. Tuesday night, May 31st, was the riot, and Wednesday morning, by daybreak, was the invasion. Anonymous.
Testimonials of the Tulsa Riot, Tulsa, Oklahoma, June 20th, 1921. First information that I received of the riot came about 9:30 o'clock Tuesday night, May 31st, 1921. I was attending a play given by the senior class. A little boy came up, almost out of breath, and exclaimed, "They are trying to lynch a colored man downtown, and the colored people are going down to prevent it." The meeting broke up in some confusion, and all went home. We sat up at our houses till about midnight, and then we decided to go to bed. There was little sleeping, for the noise of guns kept us awake all night. About 5 o'clock in the morning, a very peculiar whistle blew. This seemed to have been a signal for a concerted attack by the whites, for immediately a terrible gunfire began. Aeroplanes also began to fly over very low. What they were doing I cannot say, for I was in my room. About 5:30, someone called up our home and said for the men not to fight, for the home guard were visiting the homes and searching them, but that they would harm no one. A few minutes after that, some men appeared with drawn guns and ordered all men out of the house. I went out immediately. They ordered me to raise my hand, after which 3 or 4 men searched me. They told me to line up in the street. I requested to let me get my hat and best shoes, but they refused and abusively ordered me to line up. They refused to let one of the men put any kind of shoes on. After lining up some 30 or 40 of us men, they ran us through the streets to the convention hall, forcing us to keep our hands in the air all the while. While we were running, some of the ruffians would shoot at our heels and swore at those who had difficulty in keeping up. They actually drove a car into the bunch and knocked down 2 or 3 men. When we reached the convention hall, we were searched again. There people were herded in like cattle. The sick and wounded were dumped out in front of the building and remained without attention for hours. James T.A. West, teacher in high school.
About 9:30 on the night of Tuesday, May 31st, 1921, I heard the report of guns and thought it a fire signal. Then I found out what the trouble was. I became tangled up with the walls of my bedroom, and after getting straightened out, I went to the door, saw people rushing to and fro. I called to a man and asked what the trouble was, and finally my neighbor told me that the white people were going to lynch a man. I dressed the little girl who was with me at the time and went to a neighbor, stayed there until about 1 o'clock, and then returned home. I tried to sleep but could not, so arose about 4:30 Wednesday a.m. and saw people rushing from Greenwood and that section of the town. A group of whites stationed on the hill fired upon them, some falling, others struggling on to safety. Then it dawned upon me of the danger to my invalid mother, who had been helpless for 4 years. She was about 6 blocks from me, up in the direction from which the people were fleeing. I reached her in the midst of a rain of bullets. My sisters and I gathered her up, placed her on a cot, and 3 of us carried the cot and the other one carried a bundle of clothes. Thus we carried Mother about 6 blocks with bullets falling on all sides. About 6 squads of rioters overtook us, asked for men and guns, made us hold up our hands. There were boys in the bunch from about 10 years upward, all armed with guns. They would go into the houses, take what they wanted, and then burn the house. Our men were all disarmed as soon as caught. About 11 o'clock, the enemy took my invalid mother and one of my sisters, supposedly, to send them to Convention Hall for safety. Another sister and I scouted about 1 o'clock until 1 o'clock when along came a truck and picked me up and carried me to Convention Hall, where I stayed until about 2 o'clock. On entering Convention Hall, I failed to find my mother, so I went and searched for her. With the aid of the Red Cross, I found her that night at the North Methodist Church. I made myself contented until Thursday and came out to see if I had a home. Out of 3 houses that had brought me $45 per month rent, I found one little rickety shack. After finding it, I returned for my mother, kept her until Sunday morning, and in the meantime, I tried to get a pass to send her away, but failed to get one. So I took what little change I had left and sent her away. She remained unconscious for 2 weeks and then passed away. When we were trying to take her to safety, an airplane shot down a man right in our path. I feel like this damnable affair has ruined us all. Miss Carrie Kinlaw.
Immediate cause. There was a report in the Tulsa Tribune that threats were being made to lynch a Negro for attempted criminal assault upon a white girl, which was wholly without foundation or cause. Second, white men reading this report gathered at the jail to take part in the lynching, and the Negroes, seeing this gathering, rightly concluded that lynching was the object of the white people and consequently armed themselves and came on the scene and offered their support and assistance to the sheriff. While this was in progress, a fight between some whites and Negroes was started, which resulted in several members of each side being shot. The Negroes then left the courthouse and came to the east end, leaving a guard at every approach to the Negro quarter. Desultory firing on both sides was kept up for several hours, when the Negroes, believing all danger of an invasion by the whites over, went to their homes. But during this time, and unknown to them, plans for an armed invasion of the Negro quarter by the whites under protection of the city and county police had been underway. The avowed purpose of this invasion was to disarm the Negroes and to corral the men or arrest them that they might not do any further harm. They, the whites, did this and in most cases met with no resistance except in cases where no reason was given by the whites for entering the Negro homes, and this was generally the rule. The Negro did not know whether he was being called out to be shot or what, for shooting was all he could hear or see. If he submitted without question, he was taken to jail. But if he dared to question the intruder, he was shot. After all, the men had been corralled. The women and children were told to go to the public parks where an armed guard would protect them, and that a guard would protect their homes. This ended the riot so far as the Negro had anything to do with it. Then came the great unthinkable, the unspeakable climax. The white people went into those homes just vacated, carried away everything of value, opened safes, destroyed all legal papers and documents, then set fire to the buildings to hide their crime. Then, not satisfied with the results, charges were framed against every leading Negro in an attempt to jail them and to intimidate the others, saying that the whole fault lay with the educated Negroes. The fact is that the educated Negroes have never caused trouble or friction. But there has been allowed to flourish a crowd of uneducated whites and Negroes who lived by their wits, and it is the intermingling of these whites with these Negroes that has always been the starting point of most of our trouble. P.S. Thompson, President of Tulsa Medical, Dental, and Pharmaceutical Association.